Welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I'm here with Monty Suri. We're going to talk about poetry, hopefully some acting, some comedy, some shenanigans, how the holidays went in the new year and all that jazz. So, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored, privileged, and as you might know, I'm the shy and retiring type. So um, I don't know how well this is going to go. I hope well.
Well, you can always leave the shenanigans to me. I just wanted to start off by saying, well, first of all, thank you, because many people might not know, but years ago when I first kind of got involved in the open mic scene in Los Angeles, one of my major gateways and venues was through the Rap Saloon there in Santa Monica, and you were a host there, and always very kind and welcoming, kind of taking me under your wing with a few of the other, hosts there at the time. And it was a good drug, I like to say, to have, was the adrenaline and the reading, the writing, and just kind of sitting in the room and kind of taking bits and pieces from everyone saying, okay, I like that, or, oh, that's how you do that, or that's interesting, I like that. So I guess maybe just kind of start about how you kind of got pulled into the vortex of open mics and readings and things like that.
Uh, I think probably the first open mic reading I ever went to was at the Water Gallery run by Doug Knott. I don't know if I think that's his name.
Okay.
And I had, was looking for things in the non-traditional newspapers as to what was going on socially, and found this place. And I said, okay, let me go over. And I tried some of the stuff that I'd written ages ago, and I went back, and I got a good reception, but I was advised that I ought to have memorized my poems instead of just reading them, and I still haven't gotten around to doing that. So
Me neither. You're not the only one.
yeah, well, and now that my memory is not as good as it used to be, I read even more directly from the page. So so that was it. And then I met Marissa, my late wife. She passed away last April. And so we started dating, and I had told her about the poetry readings, and she said, you haven't been going to readings for a while. What's going on? And I said, well, I used to, read and write and go to the readings because, things weren't going so great in my life. And, it was a way of coping. So she said, okay. And then after we got married, and about a year or 2 years later, we happened to come across this little poetry group in a local bookshop. And I asked about what they were doing, and then I went back to it. And then I started going to more of their readings, and I found out about other readings. And then she said, should I start worrying? I said, no, it's just fun stuff,
Yeah.
giving me a chance to get my writing chops back together. And so they used to have little projects, or, words or phrases to write to, and, inspire. And so that's how that happened. And I learned about more and more readings and started going to more readings, and eventually found Pete Justice's reading, and he found it along with I think it was Jack Smith, if I'm not mistaken. My memory of names is horrible.
I forget names as well.
Yeah. So and they had launched this reading at the Rap Saloon, which was housed in the oldest brick building in Pasadena. No, sorry, Pasadena, in Santa Monica. So so that was good. And then I started going to readings in San Gabriel Valley, where Don Kingfisher Campbell was hosting some readings. And that was Pasadena because I was working in Pasadena. I'd learned about some reading. So there's Barnes and Noble that was nearby. And then I went to one of the readings at Don Campbell's reading, and he said, "Do you have a chapbook?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "You have some good work there. You should put it together in a chapbook, and we'll give you a feature." And I said, "Hey, wow!"
Good
So he's the
deal.
first. He's the first one to have enough belief in what I wrote and my work, and also to give me a feature. So that was exciting.
That's a good deal. Were you familiar at that time or over the course of time in the Next magazine that kind of Murray Thomas was putting out there in print?
Yeah,
So later
yeah,
on.
I became familiar with that and some of the events that he was mentioning and what was happening in the poetry world and stuff. So, yeah,
And
and
that
then
really helped, I think, people to just find things because especially
right,
we're talking about a lot of them, and I'm sure you know too, that were like mom and pop coffee shops or
right,
the back of a restaurant where you
right,
normally would just drive by and not think
right,
anything about it, and then going, oh,
right.
I didn't even know there was a reading here.
Or you walk into a bookstore and you find it. Of course, Barnes and Noble is gone now, but other readings, you find by accident and stuff. So
And,
that was pretty good.
and one thing I was going to ask too, because I know you've dabbled in stand-up comedy, and I have too, and I wanted to kind of ask you, do you feel like that kind of maybe changed or enhanced the way you carry yourself at a microphone at an open mic or a reading where it's like a confidence builder where you're performing, your stand-up and you get that first, clap or that first woo or that first kind of rush of adrenaline of like,
Yeah.
hey, they get it. I don't suck at this. So do you think that kind of helped or changed things along the
Actually,
way?
I don't. You mean in terms of my poetry, whether comedy helped it?
Right.
Uh, if anything, it's probably more so the other way around because I'd been doing poetry for a lot longer than I started doing comedy, stand up, and stand up really started just relatively about 5, 6 years ago or something like that. Maybe a little bit longer, but I can't pinpoint it. I used to, I guess, as a kid, I was growing up and I always thought, I must have been a ham of some kind because my grandfather would always take me to the Metro Goldwyn Theater in Calcutta. And they always had a children's program, and kids would sing songs or whatever they had as a talent. And I made up my own song, which was a takeoff on one of one of the existing songs, and didn't win the prize. I mean, a consolation prize, but it was still, something that um, it was interesting. And then poetry, I just, like I said, I started writing a little bit here and there, and got inspired by different things. And uh, if I watch a show on TV and it affects me, then I write something about it. I wrote a poem after I saw uh, a show called Sonnenschein. Sunshine. It was about this, I think it was a Viennese family. And, they were very patriotic and this, that, and the other. And eventually, all this business with Jew hatred and all that stuff came along in World War One, and he was relegated to, nothingness, basically. And then the scenes of officers coming along and laying people down on the floor and just shooting them in a line, that was horrible. Or I saw a documentary about Basquiat, and so that was quite interesting. So I wrote a poem after that, and so that's been received fairly well. And other things that came along, so I wrote and built up 3 chapbooks.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I remember hearing you had a great poem. I think the actual title of it was Jazz, and I always really
Oh
liked
yeah.
that one. And there was another one about, I think, the mechanics of writing itself in terms of putting a period and punctuation.
Oh yeah.
And
Punctuated poetry.
yeah, I got a kick out of that
Right.
as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're still reading those if you go out anywhere anymore.
Every now and then I've gone over and there's a studio theater reading that Alex Frankel runs. In fact, I'll be going over there later today, and that's at 5 o'clock. And yesterday I was at James Everett Jones's reading, and so I read, in fact, I read punctuated poetry there yesterday, so it went over quite well.
Nice. So you have done dabbled in a little bit of the acting, and I kind of was curious, what kind of got you into that? Was it just a general building up of confidence with the poetry and the comedy that was like a natural progression, or is that something you just kind of always wanted to try?
Well, again, as a kid, I was a ham. And our school usually had plays, that they would stage. And one of them was The Gods of Marma way back when. And, I was one of the gods. I don't remember the whole storyline. I'd have to go back into Google or Wikipedia or something and figure out exactly what the storyline was. So that was one of the plays I was in. And then there was something else, which was the life of Major General Claude Martin, who was the founder of our school. He was a French guy who had stowed aboard a ship from Lyon, France, where he was from, and went to India, served with the East India Company, amassed a fortune. And when he died, he left 3 schools, one for boys and girls, separate schools. It wasn't co-ed. So one was in Lucknow, where he had established himself, and his home is called Constancy, and another in Calcutta, which was the capital of the British Raj at the time, and one in Lyon, where he was born. So so that, and it was founded in 1836. So that was nice. So I took part in some of the plays there. So one was on his life story, and I was one of the holders of the cocks they had a cockfighting contest on stage. So I was holding one of the cocks. So that was one of the things. And another was a scene in Julius Caesar. And because I had long hair, they said, okay, you put on a frock and be part of the mob scenes. Okay.
That's pretty cool.
They had elocution contests and stuff. So I took, part in some of those. And so that's where it basically started. Of course, I wasn't getting paid for any of that.
Yeah,
but
of course, yeah.
When I was here in the States, I noticed that one of my clients had about 50 W-2s and 1099s for him and his family, because they were doing background work. And I said, what's this all about? And they said, well, you can just go in, they'll pay you for it. And so eventually, after I retired from ARCO in 2000, I went ahead and went to Central Casting, and I said, what's all this background stuff about? So I started going on different shows, and so that's where that came about. And Dana Snow, I think you know him, referred me to a young lady, Rosie, who was trying to put on a show, a pilot. And so I played Swami Perkadanda in there. And actually, some of the scenes towards the end were directed by Ted Lang.
Wow.
Who also happens to write poetry. So
small world.
From Love Boat. So
right.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting.
Small world. Wow. I guess this is a kind of more of a personal question about poetry. It seems to be that there's just really no limit to what you can write about, and just in general. Do you feel that if there was a percentage, let's say, of your poems, would you say how much of a percentage was like a confessional, like you going through something and getting it, just trying to get it out, just getting it on the page,
Yeah.
versus like observation, like, look at that crazy guy, wearing the chicken hat and twirling the sign or something. He almost walked into traffic or something. So what would you say the percentages of that, if there
I can't say if I could put a percentage on it. I haven't even tried. I mean, there are some poems that, are somewhat of a romantic nature, I suppose.
Mhm.
And my wife, when she saw me going to a lot of poetry readings, her friends were telling her, "You must have some girls out there," or something like that. So there's got to be more than poetry going
Gotta be
on.
more than him just scribbling something and standing up in front of 15 people and
Right,
sitting back down.
right. So she came to a few readings and she was comfortable. She said, "Okay."
Okay,
But
okay.
yeah, but the style of poetry that I had, I guess, was not something that she was keen on. And so when I put my first poetry chapbook together, the title came out to be Poetry My Wife Hates, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Still a great title.
Yeah, so it's a mouthful of a title. And then the next one was Reflection, More Poetry My Wife Hates, and Mistresses I Might Have Had Who Might Have Loved It, and so on and so forth. And then my third one was Poetry My Wife Hates, third in a series.
The ongoing, continuing
Yeah, and
adventures.
then
Yeah.
I'm hoping to put together one that says, Poetry My Wife Hates, a compendium. But alas, she's no longer here to hate it. But I may have to change that to Poetry My Wife Hated.
But
So,
still a great series of titles nonetheless. So I guess one question I kind of ask people too is, I'm guessing you obviously have traveled all around the world. Do you find that a change of scenery not only does you good on a human level, on a soul level, but just going around, seeing the different architecture, the different cultures,
oh yeah.
the cuisine, do you feel like that kind of feeds your artistic fervor, as it were?
To some extent, I would certainly say it certainly has fed my penchant, I suppose, a penchant for preserving some of the images. So I've been taking a lot of pictures with my cell phone and stuff, and I've shared them. And a friend of mine told me I should get myself a professional camera. So Steve Cohen, you know him, I think.
Mhm.
And so I've started getting into that more so also. And I'm in the process of putting up a couple of websites to showcase some of my maybe delusions of grandeur. I don't know.
No, I
And,
mean, go for it. There's nothing holding you back. I mean,
right,
I think that the only difference between somebody who does something for a hobby versus you're talking about photographs, something in a gallery,
right.
is just no one came over and tapped them on the shoulder when they were either taking the photo or posting it online or saying like, "Hey, have you ever thought about trying to
Yeah,
do something, getting it in a gallery?" Or
right.
and they go, "Oh, what?"
I've done some digital art on my phone also. I happen to have lost my stylus that I bought for a couple of times because I lost one and then bought another one and that's lost too. But I created a little bit of digital art and shared it on Facebook and stuff. People seem to like it, so I might throw that in the site also and print some of those things.
Oh yeah,
So
and I'm a big believer of one kind of art feeds the other, and which is why
right,
we're talking about all these different subjects. It's just
right,
it could do nothing but help bring attention to all of the other things that you do.
right.
And one question, I mean, you're talking about documentaries, and I've been watching a few things too. Was what do you think about not just maybe classical writing and poetry, but things from 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? What do you think it is about a great story or a great poem that resonates through the years that people keep going back to it and eventually used in, high schools and colleges and things where we call this, great art. But
Yeah.
what do you think about those things?
Well, I would have to admit, confess, whatever, but I'm very much enthralled by Shakespeare.
Mhm.
Of course, the old poetry traditions, they were all rhyming poetry, and I was writing some of that stuff, and I found that that's not, that's looked down upon by modern poets. And but that's how the oral tradition actually survived, and so many great works were preserved. And as it turns out, me being a Sikh, we've got 10 prophets who all recited poetry and or wrote poetry, and all of their works are basically in our holy book. Guru Nanak was our first prophet, and he recited poetry, and he had a guy next to him, a Muslim, who played the rabab, which is an instrument, and he would sing his poetry. And I don't have any skill to carry any notes, so or tunes. I don't try and sing anything, but I was influenced very much by the structure that they had, and the longevity of the works. That's I think that's probably one of the reasons you find people going back to those classics, um, because they stand the test of time. I don't know how many people are going to memorize some of the great poets that exist today, the modern poets who write I guess more in a prose style, without actually spending a lot of time learning any particular poem. I love Billy Collins's work, the poet laureate in the past of the United States. He's got a poem called Forgetfulness. I don't know if you're familiar with it,
Mhm.
but it's an awesome poem. It's just that it would take me a while to remember it, or have millions of other people learn it in schools and then be able to recite it, 100 years from now.
So
We can edit that out.
about Shakespeare's version of Julius Caesar versus
Yeah.
the reality of what actually happened historically. And you talk to any high school kid, most likely they're going to say, "Oh, it's like in history when Brutus stabbed Caesar, and then Caesar said, Et tu, Brute?"
Et tu, Brute, right.
Never happened.
Right.
Total fabrication. In
Right.
fact, as far as historically we know, after the last stab, I think Caesar, started to pull his toga over his face because he was so ashamed. But of course, that doesn't play well on a stage.
Yeah.
You can't see the guy's face.
Right.
So it's just, that play been handed down through so many generations. People just assume that's what really happened.
Right. Yeah. Well, forget about Shakespeare and whatever his thoughts were about Brutus and Caesar. There are people who are going through college now on college campuses, and they don't know who fought the Civil War and who won. So it's
painful.
It's amazing.
Painful. It's painful. But in terms of poets, it's interesting too, because I feel like my generation and the generation before grew up with and had a working knowledge of all of the beat poets.
Right.
Going back to the late 40s, all the way through 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. But what I'm witnessing, or I'm my own experience with is it seems to be, we're talking about the language surviving. It's very few famous poems. You've got your Howl and peyote
Right.
poem, bomb poem, things like that that stand the test of time. And it seems to be once the actual writer passes away, and
Right.
there's that flurry for a few days of like
Right.
everybody downloading this and getting this
Right.
and running to the bookstore and getting that, or
Right.
if they had us,
Right.
songs, downloading the songs, and then it's just gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you witnessed that as well?
Uh, I haven't consciously thought about it, but I agree with you. That is certainly happening and has happened. Uh, you know, uh, I don't know how many people even know who wrote Howl, and or which poet decided to come to a poetry reading and just play a recording of his poem instead of actually reciting it,
Right.
and things like that. And I became familiar with names like Ferlinghetti and Bukowski and stuff like that. But until I started coming onto poetry readings and things like that, and becoming familiar with some of the names that people were dropping, I really wasn't all that cognizant of them, because in my training I knew about Chaucer and Tennyson and uh, William Shakespeare, of course, and some of the others, but the classical poets. But I wasn't aware of a lot of the American poets, and even Langston Hughes, who's a great poet. I wasn't familiar with any of his work until much more relatively recently, I would say.
Right.
And they're all great writers, but I don't know if I could tell you that I can recite any one of their poems.
Right. I mean, just as an example, I mean, I remember growing up in the movie Barfly came out with Mickey Rourke.
Right.
I remember someone saying like, "Oh, that's based on something by Charles Bukowski," and I said, "Well, who's that?" "Oh, you don't know who that is?" And
Right. Yeah.
writer. And honestly, it wasn't until I got to LA
Right.
where he's much more celebrated locally
Right.
than anywhere else in the country. I
Right.
mean, and I've gone to New York and Chicago and other larger cities, and yeah, people know his name, but
Right.
here he's almost been, I don't know,
Right.
deified or something. But
Right.
just so many local writers look up to him, and it wasn't
Yeah.
until I don't think I even read Ham on Rye until I moved to LA. But people were
Uh-huh.
like, "Oh, you've got to do this."
Right. Yeah.
It turns
Right.
into that scene from the movie High Fidelity in the record store, like,
Uh-huh.
own blonde on blonde, what's wrong with you? And
Right.
so did you have experiences like that when you came to LA where people were saying like, "Oh, well, you're into this. Maybe you'd like this writer or this collection."
No, I wasn't really. When I came to LA, that was 45 years ago, and I was not into the poetry scene or anything like that. That only happened in the early 80s.
Hmm.
So that's something that I didn't really get into a lot of the names of other poets and stuff until I started going out to poetry readings, like in the mid 80s maybe.
Right.
And then it became, or even in the 90s especially. So I didn't really pay too much attention. I mean, all I know consciously is that I may not know the whole poem, but I can recite lines from Merchant of Venice.
Right.
Do we not have hands? Do we not bleed? Do we, things of that nature? And so.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of gotten to the point too, I think, that even with writers that will just they go on talk shows, so
Right.
there's that cult of celebrity kind of thing where, I mean, I grew up reading Stephen King, but let's face it, at this point he could literally publish his grocery list as a poem and people
Right.
are like, "Yeah, I gotta have it."
Right.
Where
Yeah.
can I find it? Is there a sequel?
Right.
Is it a series? I gotta find it.
Yeah.
But yeah, your J.K. Rowling's, just anybody out there that's had any kind of series of books. And I think that, what I've noticed in the last 20 years, 15, 20 years is just the growth of the young adult fantasy novel series thing is just one of those things where I wish I would have had some kind of idea of, it's just a tweak on the hero's journey
Right.
from Joseph Campbell. But you can only carry that guilt for a while going,
Right.
they can have it,
Right.
have fun,
Yeah.
let them run with that.
Right.
So is there something that you have always wanted to try in terms of writing, not just poetry, that you haven't tried that maybe you want to work on, or aspirations, anything?
Yeah, something that I've always had in the back of my mind, and actually it has been done by, I think it was Seth is his last name. He wrote an entire novel in poetry form, in verse, and it was about San Francisco, if I remember correctly. And I wanted to make a film, like, of course, Shakespearean plays have been turned into film, and so I wanted to have something more modern, but it's been done. So someday maybe I'll sit down and have the patience to come up with something along those lines. But that's maybe a want to do. But I think what I may want to do also is, if my photography stuff goes well, I might start adding poems to some of my pictures. Actually, I did one that was about Claude Monet when I went to Giverny way back when I took my older son there, and reflecting on a lily pond. And so that was a poem that was actually included in the I think it was diversity reading in Austin. So that was interesting. I don't remember the title of the show, but it's the Austin International Poetry Festival. And I went to that and I read my poem. And 6 months later, I actually met some people whom I had met, invited me to come to London for the Paddington International Poetry Festival.
Wow.
And of course, they didn't pay for my airfare or living accommodations.
Right.
But I did get £100 honorarium.
Hey, not bad.
Yeah, I mean, so that was flattering.
The
Yeah.
land of the Beatles. Would you say that music has kind of influenced your writing in the last few years in particular? Just going back to music that you heard when you were a kid, or just all the way through up until today?
Yeah, I guess, in fact, there was a poem I read the other day called Jazz that you had mentioned. And someone said, seems to be a lot of music in there. Well, I guess so. But yeah. And I can't specifically say which particular song or anything like that, or which piece of music would have done it, but I do like the flow of music, and I'd be too self-conscious, I guess, or whatever, in thinking that any of the poetry that I write, the words have any kind of musical flow, but I hope they do.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that. It's one of the reasons why the question came up, because like I said, I was thinking about the jazz poem and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is a guy who's definitely got references to the music in his work. So
yeah, but I don't know enough about music that I'd be able to tell you, which.
Well, just in the general sense, I mean, for example, came to kind of the folk music idiom later in life, music with a message kind of a thing. So that, you're talking about having the ear and listening
Right.
to, rhyming poetry and,
Right.
people like Dylan and things where it's like, well, it's a two-edged sword. It's like, well, you can write an 11-minute long song.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
But doing that in front of an audience, there's that danger of like, well, I guess if you're not Bob Dylan, is someone going to sit there and listen to it, or
Yeah,
oh, I need to go hit the snack bar right
yeah.
now.
No, I did find that the French singers, a lot of them have a whole story that goes through the song. Like if you listen to Jacques Brel's songs, one of them that I really find very touching is "Ne me quitte pas," "Don't leave me," and it's so much imagery in there for every line that he's reading. It's amazing, and it's not like he's repeating, yada da da da, yada da da da, yada. It's not
Right.
that. So, and I wanted to write songs once upon a time, but I haven't got around to doing any of that. Since I don't play a guitar, I don't play any instrument. I did try to learn a guitar when I was a kid, and my father and his friend, who also had a son who was interested in learning guitar. So we had our first lesson, and we were ready for the next one. And the next one came along. I was there for it, and the teacher didn't show up. We later learned that he had eloped with his girlfriends.
Oh my God.
That was the end of my music career.
It's a great story. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there.
Okay.
It's been a great conversation, but before we go, is just let the folks know where they can find your work online.
Poetic Diversity, that's Marie Lecrivain's old site. I think they have some poems. If you look for Money Suri poetry, you might find some. Don't be confused with Manil Suri, who's an excellent writer and also has a chair in mathematics in Virginia, I believe. He's a brilliant writer, but don't be confused with me on that one. I'm just giving you a heads up.
Fair enough.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for being on the show.